So now we're starting with our session. Dysmorphic uteri are actually a problematic entity in our daily practice. And Maribel Acién and I are honored to chair this session, and we want actually a hot debate at the end. So we would kindly request our speakers to respect the scheduled time. And without further ado, we start with the opening lecture with Professor Maribel Acién. She's a European doctor in obstetrics and gynecology and professor at Miguel Hernández University, chief of gynecology section at San Juan University Hospital, Alicante, Spain, and leader of the mixed research unit reproductive biopathologies, FISA Bio UAUMH. So, Maribel, the floor is yours.
Bene. I've heard it. Yes. So good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see that the auditorium is nearly full after such a wonderful party yesterday. Before I start, I wanted to thank the organizing committee, so our three master kings, for their kind invitation to give this opening lecture on the dysmorphic uterus, for which, I'm sorry to say, I will start with embryology, since I believe it is important to understand how anatomy develops and how it is influenced. So in this figure, you can see on a 6 weeks embryo the beginning of the invagination of the paramesonephric or Müller duct, while at the same time in the thickness of the urogenital ridge, the mesonephric excretory tubules converge to form a mesonephric or Wolffian duct that descends to the cloaca, opening into the urogenital sinus. So the paramesonephric or Müller duct remains open into the coelomic cavity, descends parallel and external to the Wolffian duct, then crosses it ventrally and unifies with the one of the other side in a midline Y-shaped structure that is the uterine primordium, but without reaching the urogenital sinus. And this is important. There's also another important element that may play a role in the definitive uterine development. And this other structure is the gubernaculum. The gubernaculum is a peritoneal fold that goes from the inguinal cone in the abdominal wall till the gonad. The thing is that in the woman, because the Müllerian duct is developing, the path of the gubernaculum is interrupted, and then the fibers incorporate into the uterine wall, becoming the round ligament. But this crossing point, it's important, as you see in here, because from the crossing point upwards, this section of the Müller duct will remain separated and will eventually form the fallopian tubes, whereas the segment located downwards is the one that moves into the caudomedial direction and, lying side by side, will fuse to form the uterine primordium till the external cervical os. So fusion and reabsorption of the middle line septum, fusion and reabsorption of the middle line septum typically begin at the isthmus, because the isthmus is the most proximate part of the Müllerian ducts when they unify. And then it proceeds from that point simultaneously but independently in the cranial and caudal direction. Thereafter, so once that this has occurred, is when the fused ducts will still have to grow. And this process is all the time controlled by the Wolffian ducts that are located at both sides, acting as guide elements, as we were able to show in experiments with embryo rats. In these experiments, we were also able to note that there is a third portion of the Müller duct, and it is exactly this little part where you see that, again, there's a slight divergence. The beginning of this divergence corresponds to the internal cervical ostia, whereas the tip of the Müller duct corresponds to the external cervical os. And it is important to note that these different areas, these three different portions of the Müller ducts, have also been related to different gene expressions of the Hoxa family. According to the most recent classifications of differences or disorders of sex development, they are now classified based on the chromosomes, so XY, XX, and anomalies at sex chromosomes, with a subgroup kept for iatrogenia or endocrine disruption. Additionally, and maybe debatable, we will see later, this classification also includes malformative anomalies such as the Rokitansky syndrome under an unclassified group. As you know, disorders of sexual development could be due to an altered determination or an altered differentiation, where in this last subcategory, endocrine disruptors or hormones may play a role influencing the development of an individual under an androgenic or estrogenic ambient. The most recent clearly known endocrine disruptor of female genital tract has been the diethylstilbestrol, and this drug with an estrogenic effect was prescribed between 1940 and 1970 to avoid miscarriage in pregnant women. And the effects that this drug was having in the uterovagina of their daughters was soon characterized as young women clear cell vaginal adenocarcinoma, and as you know, uterine forms that were defined as bulbous, hypoplastic, or T-shape. The effects of this drug, the diethylstilbestrol, seem to have been executed by altering the Hox gene expression, a spatial distribution, leading to a structural but also to long-term functional defects, since the early developmental stage where these daughters were exposed is the most susceptible window for developmental but also for genomic programming. And you might be wondering, why am I bringing this old and past problem to today's discussion? And the reason is because it has been proven with epidemiological papers that this compound also controls the processes of epigenetic transgenerational inheritance, increasing the risk of reproductive tract anomalies in the granddaughters of those girls that were exposed. So in general, there is little evidence linking environmental agents with a specific congenital uterine anomaly, although mainly, and I would say quite interestingly, estrogenic, androgenic, and also anti-androgenic compounds have been linked to dysplastic or the Rokitansky syndrome, so the absent uterus in animals. And these animal data indicate that adult uterine abnormalities are susceptible to developmental effects induced by many, and you have here quite a list, also endocrine disruptors, probably as well mediated by changes in genes which are relevant for uterine structure and also for endometrial function with a potential transgenerational effect. Boutron and Gibbons were including the hypoplastic T-shape and death-related anomalies in a different class of the American classification, the older one, due to their particular form and also a special correlation to second trimestral miscarriages, as some of them also associate cervical insufficiency. As you can see in the picture, this particular morphology or hypoplastic cavity can be easily recognized at hysterosalpingography, but is often difficult to be picked at a basic ultrasound. The ESRE-ESGE classification system refers to them as the dysmorphic uterus and subdivides into a T-shape, which is characterized by a narrow cavity and a thickened lateral walls with a correlation of 2/3 for the body, 1/3 for the cervix. Then it is also the infantilis, characterized also by a narrow cavity but with normal uterine walls, and an inverse correlation of 1/3 for the body and 2/3 for the cervix. And a third group of others where Alonso's variations, the Y and the I uteri, should be placed. The problem is that there are no clear or unanimous accepted 3D ultrasound parameters to define this pathology, although some attempts have been done. So we, as part of the Küme group led by Professor Ludwin, published a proposal which was calculated to have the highest accuracy. And the thresholds parameters that we propose is a lateral indentation angle 130, a lateral internal indentation depth of 7 millimeter, and a T-cornual angle 40 degrees. But in that paper, we were stressing that the T-shaped uterus diagnosis is difficult, and if just one criterion was met, this uterus should be considered normal, or other tools should be employed to clarify the diagnosis. And of course, those other tools is the hysteroscopy, as these subtypes can be easily recognized by hysteroscopy due to a tubular cavity with a tunnel vision and the characteristic fibrotic Smith rings. What's even more interesting is that in the last years, there have been several papers, some of them prospective, showing an improvement of reproductive results also in the unexplained infertility in the subfertility group of patients to achieve even spontaneous pregnancies once the cavity is widened. But remember that if cervical incompetence is present, a cervical cerclage is also or might also be needed. So mainly lateral, but also anterior and posterior section in a radial fashion to widen the uterine cavity seems to be a good option, as recently shown in a meta-analysis where in patients with infertility, live birth rates was able to reach 44% after treatment. Still, but we will hear later from perfect surgeons, well-designed control studies are needed to calculate the real effect of this intervention. And I thank you for your attention.